Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Here to talk all things hockey are your hosts, Brad Crisco, Ryan Hanna, and Evan Lobsinger.
I want to start this episode for the record. We are recording under duress because there is a trade that may or may not happen at any given point of recording. Jacob Trouba to the Red Wings is something that has been reported from multiple big names, as well as various New York Rangers media specifically, as trending towards happening with the Rangers retaining. It was suggested that it was heavily likely that it was going to happen today, if not tomorrow. Today is Saturday. It's the draft wrapped up an hour and a half ago about. It's almost 5 p.m. We should be talking about the 2024 NHL Draft, doing one of our biggest episodes of the year, the Detroit Red Wings draft review, all of that. It's the most straightforward big episode we have because all the content is laid out for us. Who'd they pick? What are the players? What is the impact? That kind of thing. But this trade is weighing over our heads. But we have a plan. Our next episode, barring anything crazy happening, is going to be Tuesday night after free agency starts on Monday. We're going to recap what has happened to date at free agency at that point. So if the Trouba trade happens, let's say tomorrow or Monday, that's where you're going to hear the Trouba content. If the Trouba trade happened today, well, then this episode's going to sound a little bit different, and there's going to be some remote recordings and addendums before it's published. We'll see how it goes. We are at the mercy of Steve Yzerman, Kris Draper, and the hockey gods overall. With that said, the 2024 NHL Draft Review episode, the Detroit Red Wings have made all of their picks. Besides the fact that we might have an emergency episode and another major episode guaranteed to happen after this, boys, we're in the home stretch.
Doesn't feel like it.
No, it does not at all. Feels like I don't even see light at the end of the tunnel yet.
I'm so glad
that we don't see light at the end of the tunnel yet.
That we're in the home stretch.
We are more than 50% of the way there in theory. So we'll see if we can actually hold that one. Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, here to talk to you about all things Detroit Red Wings and NHL 2024 entry draft overall, maybe trades with Jacob Trouba, maybe some free agency talk, and lots more. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
And I'm Evan.
On this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, as we said, we are going to be recapping the entire 2024 NHL entry draft for the Detroit Red Wings, as well as other major storylines from the draft, how the first round unfolded, major trades that happened, especially on day 2 with Utah going crazy, what we think of the Michael Brandsegg-Nygard pick, how Detroit and Steve Yzerman and Kris Draper did overall, what this means for the system, etc., etc. After recapping, each player, what we know about them so far, what to look forward to, we are then going to evaluate on a preliminary basis the other teams in the draft who kind of stood out to us as making some notable picks. That kind of evaluation is going to happen over time, though, so this won't be the last we talk of the draft. Of course, we're going to give updates on Patrick Kane, and depending on what news has or hasn't dropped, Jacob Trouba. We are going to be talking about some other various pieces of news before we jump into overtime. Before all that, I want to let you know that this podcast is proudly brought to you by our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast if you want to support the show. Patreon supporters get access to some really great benefits like the bonus overtime episodes, which record right after these main ones. They usually post right after the main ones, but on big episodes like this, sometimes they take a little longer. But we let loose, have fun. We talk about hockey content, non-hockey content. We tell stories. You get some blooper reels from the show. It's a really good time. You also get access to the Patreon exclusive Discord, which is a fantastic community. And you additionally are automatically entered into all of our giveaways. For example, we give away 2 tickets to every Detroit Red Wings home game, the vast majority going directly to our Patreon supporters. And patrons today got the benefit of rounds 2 through 7 live coverage and hangout with us, the hosts of the Winged Wheel Podcast. So it really is a great community to join and a fantastic way to help us if you're looking to go above and beyond. So again, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. Let's start by talking about how the first round unfolded. And as predicted, the Celebrini pick for San Jose was the least surprising of all. And beyond that, Artem Levshunov for Chicago, even if some folks debated whether that was the best pick, it was pretty unsurprising. Outside shot, they would have gone Demidov, but Levshunov was kind of known that Chicago, that was their guy. Beyond that is when it got a little wild, which was fun. And it made things interesting if you were a Red Wings fan for a hot second there that something crazy might happen. So let's start with pick 3. Anaheim takes Sennecke 3rd overall with players like Demidov, Lidstrom, Salayev, others on the board. What was that pick and what do you think?
Well, that was an upside pick for sure. We've talked about the second half of his season, how his very mediocre start turned around and he started putting up big numbers. And he's a big right shot forward with excellent hands, excellent vision, can score, big Tage Thompson vibes coming from him. And it didn't come completely out of nowhere. I think it was Scott Wheeler reported Wednesday or Thursday that he was starting to hear some Sennecke to Anaheim rumblings around the league. So I think the only person on Friday who was really, truly caught off guard by Sennecke at 3 was Sennecke.
And his parents.
Because that was an all-time reaction.
Best draft reaction since Mo Seider.
Hey, we love Mo, but that reaction was better. We couldn't read lips on what Mo was saying. We could with Sennecke.
What the It was actually a really cool moment to see. He was surprised and obviously blown away, but his parents were just that was just raw, happiness for your child. That was a really, really cool moment. And what I'll say is personally, I think Demidov was the higher upside pick. I think he could challenge Celebrini potentially for best player in the draft. That's not out of the realm of possibility, but I don't dislike the Sennecke pick overall because, like you said, a lot of upside. There's certain metrics that maybe don't paint him in the best light, but I don't really subscribe to the predictive ability of those metrics in a definitive way. He's a gamer, man. I would have loved Sennecke, but Detroit was just way too far out of range with how he was originally projected, which was 8 to 12 at worst. Anaheim got a guy, and you can, if you're a Ducks fan, I can imagine that there are some who are disappointed that it wasn't Demidov, but you could have done a lot worse in my mind.
Well, Anaheim, we'll talk about it later in the first round, but then they got Stein Solberg, so they kind of walked away with 2 excellent pieces. They clearly had a plan of taking Sennecke top 3 and then get a defenseman, see if somebody's dropping, move up if required. But they had Solberg waiting there, and they made a great pick. So Anaheim had a great first round.
The Columbus Blue Jackets followed up 4th overall with Caden Lindstrom. Again, you might have said, oh, Demidov's there for them. But when you saw Rick Nash standing next to Caden Lindstrom, you're
it all made sense.
It made a lot of sense. A couple big boys, and that's what they're looking for in Lindstrom. We said when we mocked Lindstrom and we did our profile on him, if you're not concerned by the injury history, he is a top of the draft pick for sure.
Yeah, but now we have to talk about that pick within the context of the trade offer. Because, oh my God, I think it was Pierre LeBrun reported that Chicago really wanted to trade for pick 4 from Columbus. And as part of the trade offer was Chicago's own 2025 unprotected first round pick.
Which is insane.
Columbus is nuts to pass that up. Yeah?
Plus another pick. No, Chicago wanted Demidov, right?
I would assume that's who they were going for.
I don't know that Columbus is insane to pass that up.
But think of next year's draft and think of the fact that there's a very decent chance Chicago's pick could be 1st overall, at worst 3rd or 4th.
I refuse to think about next year's draft.
That might be their thinking too.
That could be James Higgins or Michael Misa.
It could.
There's a really, really strong top 3-4 in next year's draft. Obviously, things change. Cole Eiserman would have been in this conversation for this draft a year ago.
And that has to be the thinking there. If you're in love with a guy like, Lindstrom, or if they were in love with Demidov, and you know what he is and you really believe in him, are you willing to risk losing him for someone that you don't know where they're going to be in 12 months? And you don't know how good Chicago's going to be, right? What if they go on a tear? What if they add a ton? Because if you're Chicago and you make that trade, you then add a ton, right?
Oh, yeah, you have to start buying, which they shouldn't do. But, if you're walking away from this draft with Levshunov and Demidov, you're probably in a position you can start buying a little bit, and a couple, 12th overall, 15th overall picks aren't going to hurt you going forward. But from Columbus, hey, I love Caden Lindstrom. I don't love him enough that I wouldn't have taken that gamble.
Montreal for all the fans who really wanted Michkov and they passed over him for Reinbacher, and they took Ivan Demidov. What did we say when he was drafted into the Atlantic?
Demidov.
It is extremely tough from a Red Wings perspective to see the good fortune of these other teams and rivals to land top-end offensive talent. That is the best possible outcome for Montreal at fifth. That's what they were hoping for months and months and months, and they landed it. Ivan Demidov in the Atlantic is going to hurt, but they got themselves a great pick.
Yeah, the only thing that can make this worse as a Red Wings fan when looking at a division rival is if somehow Michael Hage slipped into the 20s and they ended up with him as well.
Shut up, Brad.
You're just alert.
You're just as upset about it as I am.
I know. That was a great haul by Montreal. Utah mixed things up. Tij Iginla. They took Tij well before Calgary 3 picks later. Talk about needing defense, which they took care of, I guess, the next day.
Yeah.
They're making moves.
That pick made a whole lot more sense when you factor in what they did today.
Not an expansion team, but Utah, in terms of a new team, how they're acted much more like Vegas than they did Seattle the past couple of days. They are going to sell a lot. I think I said this in a previous mock or something. They're going to sell a lot of Utah's Tij Iginla jerseys.
Yeah. First, Ryan Smith coming to the podium and going, "Why are you booing? I haven't done anything yet." Great opening line.
We all could see into the future, so we had to get the booing started.
We didn't even talk about the Montreal pick with Celine Dion.
Oh my! Well, because we would have to talk for an hour. She took so long to spit it out.
I know,
which is it was a cool moment, though.
Yeah, you bring out Celine Dion. I don't even care who you pick; it's an A+ pick. But
very Vegas of them.
Yeah, and then Utah comes out and pisses off the entire city of Calgary. Hey, again, was a perfectly justifiable pick there. But this was also the moment in the draft where I think our eyebrows raised and went, 5 of the first 6 players were forwards in this quote-unquote defense-loaded draft. This was the first sign of, okay, weird things are happening. Because each of these individual picks was very justifiable. It was just that 5 of them were forwards.
I don't want to say it was impossible for this to happen, but as you'll see, every time we'd get to a team and we'd be like, they could really use a defenseman. And they did start to go, but the one name that kept falling, spoiler, was Zeev Buium. And we were like, hold on a second. Because if you had to pick, we knew Levshunov would go second, but if you had to pick a defenseman who could potentially be one of the top players in the draft, Zeev Buium is on that list. And he wasn't the one to go. The next pick was Ottawa at 7. I was actually like, oh, I hope Buium doesn't go there, but they took Carter Yakimchuk at 7th overall, which is a perfectly fine pick. But if you're Calgary, you're like Tij Iginla and then Carter Yakimchuk, a couple of picks before us seems like a sick joke.
Like, didn't even get close enough that they had okay, we just need Seattle to not pick one of these guys and we're golden. But yeah, Ottawa, it's understandable. I liked Zeev more than Yakimchuk, and I would say Dickinson and Yakimchuk were at least comparable. But Ottawa has Shabbat and Sanderson. Like, they had a bigger need on the right side. So to take Yakimchuk, while justifiable on skill, was also justifiable because they definitely needed a right-hand shot D.
Seattle, ignoring what people thought they needed for position, I thought they took one of the highest upside players they potentially could have at 8th overall. They took Berkeley Catton.
Oh, that was the best possible pick there because he was the best player available there.
Do you take Berkeley Catton over Zeev?
I look at everything through the Red Wings lens, so yes, but it's close.
Regardless, I think Seattle is looking at their offensive group and, they want to address long term. They don't want to be a low scoring team forever. They don't want to be a low talent team. And I'm not saying that they are, but we've talked in the past and other people have talked in the past. Seattle's going to be adding a NBA team and they're going to have to compete for, market share. And they're not the only player in town anymore, really. And so they need to be a draw. And that makes sense. Berkeley Catton should be an exciting player for them. There was like a small, tiny sliver of hope that could have been a pick that could have fallen, but it just didn't shake out that way.
Yeah, we said it was a pipe dream from the beginning. I didn't necessarily have Seattle to be the ones taking him, but I was hard-pressed to see him getting out of the top 10. And once again, here we are, 8 picks in, 2 defensemen, which was the theme of the live stream, because all of us are going, what's happening? This was the moment for me, sitting there looking at the Red Wings' 15th overall pick, and I think I've spent the better part of a year going, they need a forward, take a forward, first-round pick forward, and you see Zeev and Dickinson and Perek and all these guys falling, going,
we could use a defenseman.
We could use a defenseman here.
Next up, the Calgary Flames. I can't imagine that they're too mad about this pick. I mean, they took him over Zeev Buium. I don't know if they would have taken a Yakimchuk over him, or Tij Iginla is the obvious answer, but Zane Perek, it's a swing of a pick. High upside, as you've talked about, Brad. Offensive potential through the roof. Defense leaves a lot of concerns, but if you can develop him into being serviceable, then he could be a massive player. So how do you feel about Calgary taking that swing on Perek?
I love it. Where Calgary is in the very first days of their rebuild, this is the best time to take swings, because if he hits and you get a superstar, hell of a good start to your rebuild. If things don't progress as well as you'd hope, there's lots of runway here. They're not going to be a contender for a half decade at best. So you don't need to rush him. You can put him through whatever path you need him to go through. And at the end of it, if you end up with a top pairing power play number 1 guy, it's a grand slam. And again, there's no guarantee he's going to be that. But all context considered, this is the exact type of pick they needed to make here.
The Devils had to be surprised that Salayev was still on the board at 10 and thrilled that they were able to draft the 6'7" massive Russian.
Yeah, and thus began the run of defensemen we had been waiting on the entire top 10. And yeah, you look at New Jersey, they don't have any weaknesses in their organization.
They traded for Markstrom, and
yeah, they could take whatever player they deemed best. Yeah, we didn't think they'd take a small forward because they have a lot of them, but they could have taken a righty, they could have taken a lefty, they could have taken a center, they could have taken a winger. It all would have made sense. Salayev, you take this 6'7" monster who can skate. Yeah, that's a pretty good bet to make at 10th overall, especially given his frame. You got to think he's not a guy who's terribly far away from contributing in the NHL. And the window is wide open for the Devils right now, so makes a ton of sense.
This is one where I had the feeling, I actually mocked this pick in our mock draft and I talked about it. Even though it wouldn't have been a lot of people's favorite pick, I just felt like San Jose would want to go for what they would perceive as a bit of a safer pick. And it's not a knock on the prospect. I like him. I didn't like him more than Zeev Buium, for example. But San Jose at 11, with the trade up, they took Sam Dickinson out of London.
Not the best defenseman available, but yes, this was kind of what we hypothesized when San Jose made the trade up a couple days ago. Odds are one of the defensemen will fall out of the top 10, and San Jose will be waiting there because they have a desperate, and I mean desperate, need for defense. Go look at their system right now. It's Shakir Mukhamadullin and then nothing. Like, with all due respect to the 6th, 7th round picks that they got floating around there, that was it. And obviously they weren't going to pass on Celebrini at 1, so their next pick needed to be a defenseman. I think they were probably pleasantly surprised they had a couple to choose from, but this had to have been the plan.
Moving on, the next pick, there was a break because Minnesota ended up trading to move up 1 spot from 13 to 12. And when that first happened, I think they panned over the crowd and you saw the Red Wings on the phone. Because we were all saying, I agree with you, Brad. I didn't really want the Red Wings to take a defenseman. Solberg would have been a perfectly good defenseman that I really would have liked. But if you look at what this organization needs, it needs top 6 forwards right now in its prospect system. And still, with Zeev Buium falling that far, I'm like, he's good enough where you don't care. As you said before, it transcends. That is what true best player available. That is a dramatic example of it, to the point where I would have happily moved up. And that's not, anyone who's been listening for a while knows that I'm a big fan of moving up in this draft where the Red Wings are. I think you guys were too. But I was like, oh my God, if they make this trade, I will be thrilled. I'm still not mad, that they didn't, or with who they ended up with, but Minnesota ended up making the trade, moving up 1 spot to take Zeev Buium, and that was a That's single digit percentages that they would have thought they would have got him there, right?
Oh, 100%. They were, you saw Billy Guerin when he got on stage.
Happy as can be.
He felt like DB Cooper at that moment. Like he was stealing something. Like, wait, there's no way this is right. He gave up a third-round pick to move up one spot because he didn't want to risk it, which was a brilliant move. You see that much talent sitting on the board at 12, and you're at 13, don't risk it. Absolutely do not. Get your guy. Minnesota's system and team, like they've been the definition of mediocre for 2 decades. This is a guy who, combined with Faber, puts you in a position you could have one of the best blue lines in the league for 10 years. That is one hell of a way to get out of mediocrity.
Jet Luchenko to Philadelphia at 13 was, in my mind, the first reach.
You have to announce this pick like Michael Buffer.
Well, I can't because our stream was buffering. Because at this point, the worst thing that has ever happened to me while we've been live streaming happened, which is the whole stream died. So for all of you who joined the stream, thank you for putting up with that. And I think the worst part was, like, I was watching I was using the chat to determine whether the stream was working, and people were sending donations, like, fix the stream funds. I'm like, we're doing a bad job. Don't donate to us right now, please. But thank you to all who tuned in and who were patient and who came back after. I think we peaked at almost 4,000 of you by the time of the Red Wings pick. So thank you and apologies again. I personally blame Brad, but
that 30-second window of Philly trading out of pick 12, then leading into the stream issues was the most chaos ever because we didn't know if that was Detroit trading up. And then the internet emotions were all over the place for about a 5-minute stretch there.
Michael Buffer made a pick. It was wild.
And it was...
it was Flyers.
It was a phenomenal pick, too. He nailed that.
He did great. I would actually put it in here, but he is very litigious with the use of his phrase, and so I don't want to get on Michael Buffer's, docket, so to speak.
Let's get ready for Jet Luchenko.
But Jet Luchenko... fine prospect. We actually talked about him as like an outside shot for a guy who we haven't talked a lot about, but could fit the Red Wings mold at 15th if they like him. Philly, it wasn't a terrible pick, but in my mind, that was a reach at 13 based on who was there.
Perfectly good player. Context matters. With everybody who is still on the board, Hellenius, MBN, Hage, Connelly, Eiserman, you better be really certain that you're seeing something everybody else isn't. Which, hey, has happened. Mo Seider. Like, yep. we were in that boat, and it worked out. So I'm not saying it can't work out for Philly. I'm just saying I wouldn't have done that.
The thing is, and you know what, we'll talk about this more at the MBN pick. In the first round, especially as you get away from like the top 3, in some drafts, the top 1, you can't get married to one pick. If you're tuning in and you're doing all this research, whether you're a pro scout or, just a fan, you can't get married to one pick because things can go way different, and you'd be shocked at how different teams' draft boards look than what public consensus is.
You are correct. It's not like there's ever been a pick where us and every professional prospector in the sport would like mock a single player to a single team over and over and over and over and over and over again. You do got to spread it out a little bit.
We did it. All our predictions weren't MBN. We'll talk about it.
So the prediction, and that's a good segue, leads into pick 14 because that's where I thought MBN was going. I thought he was way too good of a fit for where Buffalo is organizationally right now, and I didn't think he'd be there for number 15.
Consta Hellenius to Buffalo at 14. Transparently, Consta Hellenius. My list, I had like a tier of guys, and it included Hellenius, Brandsegg-Nygard, it included Hage, it included Connelly, provided that the team cleared him as a person. But Hellenius, if I had to pick one, was the top of my list. I like that pick for Buffalo.
I like the player, and probably best player available there. But Buffalo is trying to pull some Wizard of Oz stuff because 90% of the people on set for them right now are 5'11" or under.
What's wrong with that?
Hey,
Evan thinks everything.
Yeah, jeez.
If it were up to me, but I digress. They are building a very interesting, unique roster right now. And again, I like Hellenius. I like the pick. I think I'm a believer that if you have all small forwards, you can succeed But then you better be elite defensively, and they are not.
And it's not even about, oh, you need people to defend them or hurt. You need people who can force the play. Like, think about what Florida did this year. They forced the play. They made you scared to get hit. They were dogged on the forecheck. They were suffocating on the PK. And I'm not saying small forwards can't do that. Like, you think of guys who's small but dogged on the Marchessault, for example, is one who's been coming up a lot lately because of free agency. But by and large, the Trevor Zegerases of the world aren't going to be that way. And so, yeah, you need to supplement it with it's a big man's league, the NHL, whether you like it or not.
The Sabres and Red Wings being at similar points in their rebuild and having like the dichotomy between how they're building their teams is going to be fascinating to see how this plays out over the next 10 years, because this could be a good direct experiment for the rest of the league. The Red Wings have not been maximizing skill with their picks and free agency, but as we've learned, they have a type. Those well-rounded, 200-foot, pain-in-the-ass players to play against. Like, the Red Wings are a team, even if you're winning, you're going to hate every minute of that game because they're going to be all over you. They're going to pressure you. They're going to hit you. They're going to make life hard on you, whereas Buffalo has, admittedly, way more skill on their team and in their system than Detroit does. Like, I don't think it's particularly close. But who on that team do you hate playing against? You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's two ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, and the real answer to how to build a team is probably in the middle of what these two teams are doing.
But you also need to be drafting where Buffalo did to do the one thing.
Exactly. The Red Wings did not have the opportunity to get a Dahlin or an Owen Power, but I digress. I think it's going to be fascinating, and I would have liked Buffalo, if I was a Sabres fan, to have taken someone like a Brandsegg-Nygard because they have such a need for it. But they didn't, and here we are.
Okay, what we're going to do now is talk about the Red Wings pick, do a full analysis on the player before we then cover the rest of the first round. So 15th overall, the Detroit Red Wings go up on the stage. Steve Yzerman, Kris Draper, and Nicklas Lidstrom. And I even said on stream, when I saw that Nick Lidstrom was making the pick, I was like, oh, this is going to be Solberg. But when he said the words Michael Brandsegg-Nygard, we were all like, it was the truth that we were not ignoring, but when we were making our predictions, we were like, let's think outside of the box a little bit. I think you and I predicted Connelly. I think, Evan, you predicted Eiserman when we said, gun to the sphere, what's one player you have to pick? But Michael Brandsegg-Nygard fits the bill more than any player fit the bill for a pick other than Celebrini to San Jose at 1. So first, who is Michael Brandsegg-Nygard as a prospect? Talk about, his development path, who he is as a player, his ultimate upside, likely ranges, all of it. Who is MBN? First ever Norwegian drafted in the first round.
This is monumental. But Brandsegg-Nygard is, again, the joke going around the hockey world for the last month, which proved true, is the most competitive 200-foot forward in the first round of this draft. Full stop. The absolute definition of a Red Wings type, and here we are. But the pick being boring doesn't mean it's bad. And I think a lot of people are misunderstanding that, because we were making the jokes all along. Please mock someone else to the Red Wings, for the love of God. This is getting ridiculous. Oh my God, Eiserman, can you step out of your type just once in your life? Prove to us that there's another dimension here. And of course he doesn't. The meme of it all is hilarious.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean it's a bad pick.
It was legitimately just, I want to feel something.
Yes. Yeah.
It's more, honestly, the Eiserman having a type, that was less it for me. It's more the mock drafts. Like, let's just get some good content.
It's like, I think we all like ice cream. But if you ate nothing but ice cream every day for 3 months, you're going to get a little sick of it. But ice cream is still good.
Yes. Go on.
Yeah. So he is that well-rounded, highly competitive 200-foot player. That's the triggering words for everybody listening, even though those are good qualities to have. He has a top 5 shot in this draft. The dude can score. You give him, you don't need a lot of time, and his release can be a little slow. But man, can this guy shoot a puck. And because he's such a competitor, and because his skating is average to maybe slightly above average at the NHL level, he's going to get chances, and he doesn't need a lot to put them in the net. And because of his amazing forechecking ability, he's going to get a lot of pucks other players wouldn't. One of the highlights that I think it was Red Wings Prospects on Twitter was throwing up today was just a collage of his steals. And dare I say it was Datsyukian. Not to the same degree. Nobody's going to be Pav, but he could get pucks that he had no business getting. And, hockey's a game of possession. The more you have it, the better. And he is very good at getting possession of the puck. And when he has it in time, in space, it's a goal. I think his playmaking's okay. I wouldn't say it's a strength of his game. There's just enough there to keep the other team honest to the point where they can't just sell out on him shooting every time they defend him. But it kind of like a DeBrincat in that sense. You wouldn't consider DeBrincat to be an elite playmaker, but every once in a while you see a pass and the defense goes, oh, okay, he sees it. We got to watch for it.
Yeah.
That type of playmaking ability. Eiserman himself referenced the goal scoring and that he's very versatile. You can play him in multiple spots on the power play. You could slap him on the left half wall as the trigger man. I think he could play net front with how good he is on pucks and how strong he is. I think he could play the bumper with how twitchy his shot is. So there's a lot of flexibility there. The fact that he shoots right, always a plus because there's not a plethora of those going around the NHL. I think he's a really, really good pick. I don't think his ceiling is super, super high, but his floor is very high. Again, I know everybody's wincing when I say that. It's a good thing. I think the reality for him is probably 20 to 25-ish goal scorer, 50-ish point player is what I think the likely outcome is. But I don't think it's super out of the realm of possibility that he's a 30-30 guy for a bunch of years in his prime.
A couple things before talking about the player, zeroing in on how Eiserman talked about him. Eiserman didn't say a lot of the things like you said, Brad, people who would have, almost shuddered when they heard it, like, compete 200-foot game. He talked a lot about his offense. It really looks like they believe in his offense, driven by his super high-end shot. Like that really, like he can score, and it's not just like the dirty areas goal. Like he can score from mid-distance, long range sometimes. Also, it's a Håkan Andersson pick. Like if you're coming out of Sweden, a Norwegian player playing in Sweden, that's a Håkan Andersson pick. And for anyone who is like, set on Eiserman or set on Hage or set on anyone else, like there is something to be said about this guy who is prolific across the NHL for how many years now, for when he bangs the table for a pick at the end of the draft or at the start of a draft, his hit rate is untouchable. So the fact that Håkan Andersson and team have the confidence to bypass guys who maybe had perceived higher end offensive upside in certain areas, like an Eiserman, for example, or like a Hage, that instills a lot of confidence. What I'll say about the player is I fully agree with you, Brad. Like there's not a lot that you don't like about his complete game. I think he's the most projectable in my mind of the guys who are still there, as in this guy's going to be an everyday NHLer. I think top 6 forward is fully within the range of possibilities, and I don't even think that's like ultimate upside. I agree. I think with how he forces the puck and how he forces the play and the way he can make the play turn on a dime by forcing a turnover or laying a big hit or just being hard on the puck. Like I think you said this on stream, Brad, an extreme example, but we just watched the Florida Panthers do this all year, and that's how they won the cup. We watched Detroit get dominated by the Florida Panthers and other teams who are hard on the puck. Detroit really struggled against those.
The Red Wings' path to the cup is not going to be the Tampa, Colorado model. It can't be.
Because they didn't win the lottery.
They will not have that talent. They do not have that talent, and it is
unless
unlikely.
They trade for it.
Which, again, very unlikely. Yeah, Florida had Barkov. The Red Wings do not have one of those in their system. But they were a well-rounded team built by a small foundation of good draft picks. And then they supplemented with trades, waiver wire claims, free agency for higher end players to round out the roster. And then they played that, oh my God, we are going to suffocate you type of game. And you can even go back to St. Louis for the more extreme example of that. They didn't have many superstars. That's probably the most likely path for Detroit to get to a cup. And also, since you referenced it when you were talking there, Little fun point for me. Do you know what was significant about the 2017 draft for the Detroit Red Wings? That's the last time they didn't take a European in the first round.
Yeah.
That's how much faith they have in a Con Anderson. Now, I know Zadina was playing in North America, but they still would have got looks at him before he came over. Every year since 2017, a European in the first round.
So overall, like MBN, you're going to be hard pressed to find anyone, professional scouts or otherwise, who would say this was a bad player. Again, I think it's perfectly fair, and it's a fan's license to do this, to say I preferred a different player. But in my opinion, I just don't see how you could be that disappointed in the pick, even if he wasn't your favorite pick. I had a range of I think 5 or 6 guys where I'm like, this I would be very, very happy with, and MBN was towards the top of that for me.
We only slightly alluded to the fact that he absolutely blows guys up when he can't directly take the puck from them. So he might be one of the best hitters in the first round. And that's going to translate exceptionally well if he never hits his high-end goal-scoring ceiling. He's already 200 plus pounds, 6'1". He is a big kid already. Yeah, I know people were probably banging the table for a Hage, a Connelly type player, but he's another guy that can fit immediately into the middle six, and we'll see what his overall long-term ceiling is. I still think he's an excellent prospect.
If you're drawing the silver linings here, or the positives versus negatives, and again, I say this in the interest of just looking at it objectively, the negatives would be, the dynamic abilities or the super high-end attributes. There are probably other guys there who could offer a little bit more in that space. And let's do away with the false dichotomy of complete 200-foot player means no offensive output. But to some degree, Eiserman and Draper and Håkan Andersson and Lidstrom, they basically looked at him and said, we are taking the gamble of this guy is going to make a bigger impact on the ice overall, even if a Hage translates and becomes a big offensive producer, or an Eiserman, for example, although with how he fell, I'm not quite sure, or Connelly, depending on how they felt about the person. They're essentially saying the totality of his game is going to have a bigger impact. That's the statement they made with 15th overall. So though it's, some people might say boring, I think it's just the Red Wings community over-scouted him. He's a great player. And something else I'll offer is, if he ends up being a top 6 winger, or let's say second line winger, for 15th overall, that's kind of all you can really hope for. I know we have Dylan Larkin on the team, but he was an aberration. He is an all-time pick from that position.
Yeah, go back through 15th overall. There's a couple huge hits, Erik Karlsson, Dylan Larkin, but they're not common. If you get a second line winger at 15th overall, you're doing well.
That's what you want.
Now, again, everything matters in context, because if we're sitting here in 5 years and, Cole Eiserman and Michael Hage are going absolutely nuts in the NHL, it's okay, good player, but they bungled the pick. But again, it's risk versus reward. I still would argue Hage, Connelly, Eiserman have higher upside, but there's no denying they're also bigger risk. There's not as much guarantee and translatability in their game like there is with Brandsegg-Nygard. And if none of these 4 hit their ultimate offensive ceilings, there's still a role for Brandsegg-Nygard where I think those other 3 would really struggle to establish a prominent role on a good team. Because what's Nygard's floor? I would argue his floor is what Rasmussen is now.
Yeah, low-end floor, I'd say, was what Rasmussen is now.
Yeah, and
I mean, any prospect can peter out and fit. We're not saying he's guaranteed, but in all likelihood, yeah.
You don't speak in the extremes and the outliers, right? There's a 100% range. We talk from the 30 to 70% range, because the 80 to 100 and the 20 to 0 are so rare in occurring, they're not worth discussing. But you always understand in the back of your mind, the possibility is there. All of a sudden, Brandsegg-Nygard discovers some playmaking next year. Oh, crap, is this guy going to be an 80-point forward? Yeah, the possibility's there, but it's such an extreme, it's not worth divulging a lot of time to.
I don't think anybody would be upset if the entirety of his career, he was just a 20-goal scorer who was just an absolute bully and an absolute fiend off the puck. That would be a great selection at 15.
So that, first of all, the name, the arch name on the back of the jersey, shout out to the equipment manager for getting that done. It looks sick, that full name, like all those letters on there. With the Brandsegg-Nygard pick, the Red Wings, for me, watching Florida all year did make me, that path that you outlined, I should say, Brad, like that is pretty much what the Red Wings are married to. They're going to have to add the higher end scoring talent elsewhere, but all in all, I'm happy for the pick. True or false, between Danielson and Kasper, I would put Brandsegg-Nygard right in the middle, closer to Danielson than Kasper in terms of the level of the prospect coming into the team, even though Kasper was a higher pick. Agree or disagree?
Oh, I would agree fully.
Yeah.
Yep, me too.
Michael Brandsegg-Nygard. The Red Wings are obsessed with drafting players with long names, 3 names, and giving Mickey Redmond all he can reckon with while on the broadcast, but no doubts that Mickey Redmond, a spring chicken, will handle it just fine.
Is that why they didn't take Leo Salin-Wallenius in the second round? They just couldn't do it to him?
Yeah, they're like, 1 is enough. We already hit him with Axel Sandin-Pellikka. ASP, MBN, we're going to work with this one.
UPN, NBC, ESPN.
Okay, we are going to take a quick break and come back and cover the rest of the first round and, of course, the Red Wings picks. But first, we want to let you know that this episode of the Winged Wheel podcast is proudly brought to you by Labatt Blue Light. Created in 1983, this premium light Canadian Pilsner is a delicately balanced beer brewed with Cascade hops and a blend of malt. It's fresh, crisp, and brewed to the highest quality standards. There's a little bit of Canadian kindness in every sip of Labatt Blue Light. How did it get in there? They're Canadian. That's how. You can spread the love yourself by sharing a Labatt. And when you do share a Labatt, you're not just sharing a beer. You're sharing an experience that'll pair with anything from hockey to a hoedown. So next time you're watching a hockey with your buds, be sure to share a Labatt, because while you might not all root for the same team, although we on this podcast do hope you're rooting for the Red Wings, you can all enjoy a Labatt Blue Light. We honestly love going to games in Detroit and seeing Labatt being the beer that fans clamor for all over the arena. It's a reliable beer and great to have in your hand when celebrating a goal. So head to the link in the description of this episode or the one you see on your screen to find Labatt in stores near you today. You must be 21 or older, and as always, enjoy responsibly. Welcome back. Covering the rest of the first round after the MBN pick at 15th overall. St. Louis right behind Detroit took Adam Jiricek, defenseman. Washington surprised some people, including the player, by taking Parasek at 17th. Chicago at 18th took Sasha Boisvert. At 19, Vegas got a super high upside pick in Trevor Connelly, so we'll see how that one plays out.
It was always gonna be Vegas, right?
You should have known that.
Yep. I don't know how that team is going to. They're going to stay good for a while. They should stay good for a while, I should say.
I love that they lean into the evil empire vibes they give off. And I'm not saying Connolly's not rehabbed or, done good work and is genuinely a good person now. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying if he's not, of course it would be Vegas.
At the absolute worst, they just trade him away for some sort of superstar level player and make another run.
Yeah, what's Vegas, the actual? They think absolute best.
Yeah.
Yeah, what are the actual odds he ever wears that jersey on the ice? Like 50-50?
Yeah, take whatever the average is that a draft pick will play for you and cut that percentage in half if you're being drafted to Vegas. Right after that is Cole Eiserman, who fell to 20. And, I was saying to you on the stream, Brad, if Cole Eiserman is falling, it kind of tells you that the teams who interviewed him and scouted him, they are leaning more towards, yes, he has an elite shot, but the rest of his game leaves concerns where it's not necessarily guaranteed. We were hearing Philly, and if Philly took Jet Luchenko over Cole Eiserman, it's a little bit of a signpost for me.
I still have a hard time buying into that because, the Islanders themselves have struck out on 2 of these types of players with Kiefer Bellows and Oliver Wahlstrom. But when it comes back to these very gifted one-dimensional goal scorers, there's 2 that fell in the draft that I remember because in both drafts, I seen mocks as high as top 10 and mocks as low as late first round. One of them ended up falling out of the first round. Cole Caulfield and Alex DeBrincat. Everybody knew the deal with them. Yeah, the rest of their game's okay. There's not a lot to love there. But man, can they score. And I'd say it's worked out pretty well for both of them.
Moving on, right after that, Montreal, what a haul for them. They draft Michael Hage at 21.
I hate how much I like their draft.
I mean, it's hard to hate it when you draft Demidov first.
Now,
they could have drafted me next,
not
and they'd
good.
still be one of the best drafts.
Not good as a fellow team in the Atlantic.
No.
Now, sometimes there's just stories that even if it's not good for your team, you have to love. You know, Michael Hage lost his father last summer, and we didn't know this until after the pick was made and he was in his presser. Turns out, Michael Hage and his family grew up Montreal Canadiens fans. And his
we should have
dad,
seen it coming there, too.
And his dad was the forefront who was leading the family in becoming Montreal Canadiens fans. So that was...
It gives you tangles.
The reaction of him and his family when he got picked, especially his mom, you could just see how much it meant to her that...
I'm soft. I'm going to cry just hearing this.
Yeah, it was truly, truly one of the feel-good moments of the draft. And then listening to him talk after, you could tell... Like, that meant a lot to his family. So that was just super cool to see.
Nashville at 22nd took Igor Surin. At 23rd, Anaheim took the other Norwegian in the first round, Stian Solberg.
Speaking of teams that had a great first round, you walk away with Sennecke and Solberg. Man, that's a good haul for a rebuilding team.
Utah takes Cole Baudouin. Boston, with their reacquired first-round pick, takes Dean Letourneau. Liam Greentree goes 26th to L.A., from Windsor to LA, as we joked on the stream, natural transition, those two cities. Merrick Vanaker to Chicago 27th, 28th, Calgary, Matvei Greden, 29th, Dallas Emil Hemming, 30th, New York Rangers, EJ Emery. And he actually said one of his role models is Keandre Miller, so that's cool for him. Ben Danford to Toronto at 31, and 32nd overall to round out the first round to Edmonton, Sam O'Reilly to end the night. Let's now talk about the Red Wings picks after that. Their first pick after day 2 started was 47th overall, so 15th pick in the second round. And they took left winger Max Plante from the USNTDP. I think he's listed at about 5'11", 175, 180 pounds. But who's Max Plante as a player? How did you like the pick, and where does he fit in the system?
First of all, Derek Plante, his dad, notable Buffalo Sabre from the 1990s, scored one of the most heartbreaking goals in Ottawa Senators history. Derek Plante scored a Game 7 OT goal for Buffalo to knock Ottawa out. So immediately love that family bloodline.
That's good genes right there.
Yeah. We've got a decade of pissing off the Sens coming up. So good start. I liked this pick when they made it, and the more I've thought about it, the more I love this pick. I will put out there Teddy Stiga would have been my preferred pick here, but again, we're splitting hairs in the second round, so it's not worth going through the 3 or 4 other players that you also liked because we're well into the dart throwing territory. Max Plante is exactly what this organization is missing stylistically. This guy has, I would argue, one elite trait and only one, but it's playmaking. This guy sees the ice with the puck. He finds lanes. He finds his teammates at the right time. And he's the type of playmaker who sees stuff that you don't see from the stands. Like, he'll be wheeling around the ozone. All of a sudden, he's got a guy wide open, far slot on his back shoulder, and he sees it, and he hits the lane. It's remarkable what he can do with the puck. Stop me if you've heard this before. He is a responsible, highly competitive 200-foot forward. He played center for the NTDP, which is a plus. I don't know if that's going to be his role in the NHL. We'll see. He's an okay skater. His shot leaves a lot to be desired, but that's also kind of a projection because he doesn't use it enough, so you don't really know. And as we've talked about, shot is not easy to develop, but of all the skills, it's the easiest to develop. I really, really like this pick because it's a high upside swing, and it's at a spot in the organization that was sorely lacking. So I really, really like this pick. It's the exact type of pick we've been begging the Red Wings to make in the second round for the past 5 years, and the only one they've really done that fits this at all would have been Buchelnikov.
No, we say this every draft season, but don't get married to a guy at the first round, for example. We just said pick 5 or 6 because it doesn't go the way you think it is. You don't have to get too far away from the first overall pick to think that. In the second round, throw it out the window. Throw it out the window because you would be so so shocked by how teams' draft boards look. There are guys who aren't even on there. There's guys that they didn't really do any extended viewings on because the first one didn't impress them. They would just be relying on external information. Like, if you think you can plan a team's second round draft picks and predict them, go make a ton of money in Vegas. And I don't mean at the draft.
I feel like I could accurately predict Carolina's at this point.
Yeah, that's fair enough. That said, with Max Plante, I agree with you, Brad. His ability to be a playmaker and specifically his skill in passing the puck is fantastic. That is a swing on upside. He's from a program that churns out really great players. They have a lot of looks on the guy with the USNTDP. You can trust the program and how they develop players. Obviously, they'd been watching for some time to take him with their second pick in the draft. I agree the finishing is something where would that be a problem? Not sure, but to have that kind of maybe like really high end, maybe even elite level passing or playmaking and vision, the Red Wings could use that. That's a big reason why I loved Hellenius. I thought he, not so much the skill side of it, but the way he thought the game, I was like, that would fit really well into the system. So for me, Max Plante, really, really like the pick.
He's got really good two-way defensive acumen as well. Like in the viewings that I was able to see after the pick, like he's very responsible defensively. He's a great back checker. So he's got lots of projectable skills. He's not going to be a goal scorer. That is incredibly obvious, I think, to everyone after a brief look into Max Plante's game. But if his passing can translate to the NHL level, he is going to potentially become an elite playmaker. And that's when you start surrounding him with triggermen, he'll have no problem being productive in the NHL.
And there's a big qualifier on that. He's a second round pick. The size isn't going to guarantee that he's going to make it. So it's a big if he makes it. But yes, I do think he has a ton of upside.
Yeah, make the upside pick. And again, you look at the Red Wings organization, they still lack at forward, although they did a really good job in this draft of addressing it. But Brandsegg-Nygard, Mazur, DeBrincat, those are finishers. Those are shooters. And now they've got a forward who can get them the puck if he pans out. And that's a huge, huge plus. Because right now, last year, it was Kane. That was it. Danielson also has a bit of that in him. So we're starting to see some balance start to finally come through the forward pipeline in this organization. And again, we talk about this all the time. We know picks outside of the first round, they don't hit nearly as often as they miss. But if you take enough swings and one of them hits, you're laughing.
Yeah.
A lot of the scouts kept saying that Max Plante's game has really continued to grow this year, and he's been making improvements in the creativeness of his playmaking and his skating. So this is a great sign if you're a Red Wings fan. It's not like his skating and creativeness has stayed the same throughout the whole year. Scouts were saying that they have seen vast improvements in both of these aspects of his game.
And he was well over a point per game, and he wasn't the go-to guy on the USNTDP, which is noteworthy because that was kind of the bill on Larkin when he was at the NTDP. Plante's production, mind you, the game of hockey, I should say, is a lot different now than it was back in 2014-15. But his production was better than Larkin's at the NTDP.
High upside pick, and lo and behold, third round, so their first three picks, like Ondrej Becher was their 80th overall pick in the third round, another high upside pick. This is a player from Czechia, but playing in the WHL for the Prince George Cougars. And year over year, from last season to this season in the WHL, he multiplied his points by over 2.5 in 5 fewer games. 38 points in 22-23 with the Cougars. Last season, 96 points in 58 games played. Double overager, so there's a risk here, and that's why you see him fall. Plays center, whether he's center or wing with the left shot at the NHL level, not sure, but this is a player with a ton of upside, and you're never going to be mad seeing that kind of point production and jump in the WHL. Became one of the most potent offensive output players in the entire league.
The third round is truly where it gets to, yeah, this probably isn't going to be much, so take a swing. I like the swing. I was watching a bit of his highlight reel after the pick too, just to go back through it. Man, he's got some sick goals on that highlight reel.
His shot is definitely underrated by scouts because his release is higher than what I think a lot of scouts were saying. and his one-timer is exceptionally powerful and accurate.
And yet, the two sickest goals I saw on his highlight were breakaways where he threw like what you would consider a changeup or like a slow ball.
I know exactly which play you're talking about.
It's not like that.
I love those. Those are so nasty.
The feel for the game and the confidence you have to pull those off is insane. Because if you screw those up, it looks awful. Because yes. I just lobbed it at the goalie and he caught it. But when they go in, they're nasty.
It's like, what's the baseball, the eephus?
Yeah.
It's like throwing that and it just gets dinged out of the park.
Pretty much the same thing. But yeah, he's got a one-timer. His straight line speed is actually impressive. His edge work isn't bad. His compete is really good. I would classify him as a 200-foot player. Like, there's enough there that you can put him in that bracket. I mean, the Red Wings picked him, so it goes without saying. His playmaking's pretty good. I get that he's 2 years older than everybody else in this draft, and that is the risk. Man, I like this player a lot, so I'm hoping this translates.
4th round pick, and I like what you said, Brad. At this point, you're really now in the weeds. By the time you're getting to the 4th round, you're going to be picking based on what you think organizational need is. You're going to be picking based on what players you have a hunch about, but you're getting into these darts are being thrown with your eyes more and more closed every pick. So 4th round is the first goalie pick and only goalie pick from this draft that we saw from Detroit, but giant goalie from the Sioux Greyhounds in the OHL, I think listed at 6'5", depending on who you ask, Landon Miller. So that was with the 126th overall pick they got from Dallas.
I feel like every goalie pick's an upside swing because that's the nature of goaltending. Mm-hmm. So we're 4 for 4.
We say goalies are voodoo, and what we mean is they have the widest range of outcomes, and it's really hard to predict. It's not a first-round goalie. There's not a lot of insight as to what they'll be. The Red Wings are adding more to the pipeline. I'm assuming this is with a thought in mind of, one of Kosa or Augustine will graduate, hopefully, within the next few years, and you want to keep feeding the system. So it's kind of standard fare, but they added a goaltender, I would say, relatively early on. It's not crazy early, but 4th round means they liked the goalie enough.
Well, here's the weird thing about this draft. This has been advertised as a weak goalie draft. I think there were, 11 or 12 off the board by the time they picked him. There was a big run on goalies in the 2nd and 3rd round. So I wonder if they picked him there because they just felt like if they waited another round, they weren't going to get anybody on their list.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 goalies off the board.
Insane. Would have never predicted that with the lead up to this draft.
Landon Miller in the 4th round was the 5th goalie in that round taken. So I actually think that is a really good call, Brad. They were probably like, you know what? Let's get our guy.
Yeah.
We like him. We want him. Let's make sure we get him. 5th round, this is a pick that might seem familiar. John Whipple out of the USN TDP. Again, they went back to that left shot defenseman, who's John Whipple as a prospect in the 5th round, 144th overall.
Now, did you really think the Red Wings were going to go a full draft without taking a good, mobile, physical, defensive defenseman? Did you really think they were? Here he is. Hey, he's good at it. Not an offensive producer at all. Gets around the ice well. Really good gap control. Really good defender off the rush. Doesn't do a lot with the puck. That's not his thing. He's okay with it. And yeah, it's fine. I think the hockey IQ is high enough that if all goes right, he could be a bottom pair defenseman in the NHL. And again, I prefer the high upside swings, but you're in the 5th round. If you get an NHLer out of that at all, You're doing great.
Almost akin to what I said about goalies. Like you do need those guys. And if you get lucky and they pan out in a big way, or maybe he develops an attribute that, wasn't initially present before, great, wonderful. But you're happy to see those picks taken at the 5th round and not the 2nd or 3rd round, right?
Exactly. Yeah. At this point in the draft, you're basically looking at a guy and you're finding a really good trait, and then you're just praying something develops around that. And with Whipple, I'd say that's probably his rush defense. He's really, really good at that. So they're probably looking, okay, we got a guy who can defend off the rush. If this guy learns to move the puck a little more efficiently, we might have something here.
Not everybody can be the number one defenseman superstar running the power play. Like, you're going to need these meat and potatoes type guys. And usually their skating is terrible. Whereas I think John Whipple's skating is actually fairly good, so it can easily translate up to the NHL level. I think he needs to improve on his hockey sense a lot. His hands are not great. He gets his shots through, but his shot's not great either. But at this point in the draft, you're looking for those big physical meat and potatoes guys.
6th round, 176 overall. Detroit picks a project player from Sweden who he's a big frame, big body, and could have surprising offensive impact. Not guaranteed to make it, but if he does, could be a really unique offensive player. And that is Charlie Forslund out of Sweden. Smaller than Soderblom. He's a paltry 6'3", 212. So, not as big as the Colossus that is Soderblom, but Charlie Forslund, I am very intrigued by that pick by the Red Wings. Again, in the context of it's the 6th round, statistically speaking, not going to make it, but hey, you talk about a Håkan Andersson pick, playing not in the first or second league in Sweden. Charlie Forslund, that Håkan Andersson in the Swedish contingent of scouts and the European scouts had eyes on him. And if he makes it, I like the guy.
2 things to start. First, I'm glad you made the Soderblom joke before I could.
Mm-hmm.
Not that they're the same player, but there's enough similarities. 2, this is kind of the point in the draft. You know how in the NFL draft, when you get into the later rounds, they're like, draft someone from Coe College, because the big college guys have been scouted to death at this point and all the good ones have been plucked up. So now you're going for the outliers and praying.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what this is. He hasn't really played at any challenging levels yet, but he's dominated the ones he's been at. Again, 6'3" with skill, wicked shot. That is a tremendous starting point for a 6th round pick. Again, probably not going to turn into much, but if he does, you got a real player there.
Elite Prospects talked a lot about his, he's a dual scoring threat, or could be, but his shot especially. Yeah, Brad, that's a good point. Like, that is what his weapon is. The part that makes him a project is how much of this is using his frame to generate any offense to move up through the Swedish ranks. He does disappear a little bit, and the consistency is what makes him fall far down the board, is why he's not higher up in the Swedish leagues yet. But again, like as Evan said, you're in the 6th round picks. You can't ask for more than that. So this eyes closed, full swing, try to knock it out of the park. Yeah, why not?
What I can tell you about Charlie Forslund is that this kid is clearly working his butt off to try and improve and try and play professional hockey. Like, he went from the J18 league to playing in a men's league this year. That's not nothing. So he's having a great rise on the backs of hard work, and hopefully that can translate even further for the Red Wings.
And if I'm not mistaken, he made a pit stop in the J20 along the way and speed bagged the competition in that league. So
right. 13 goals, 3 assists in 7 games.
Yeah, that's a great start.
Moving on with the Red Wings picks after Charlie Forslund, 2 7th round picks. We'll first start with Austin Baker, another USN TDP player, left winger, 203rd overall, 7th round. Thoughts on Austin Baker?
Depth grinder on the USN TDP. Doesn't seem like there's going to be a whole lot of upside there. Sounds like a 7th rounder to me.
He's going to MSU next year, so he'll be right in their backyard, and they'll be able to really watch his development closely. So a good pick for the 7th round.
I thought this about Max Plante and to a degree John Whipple as well, but again, the USN TDP is a fantastic program with maybe the best reputation, depending on who you can ask, in terms of, you're drafting out of this program and knowing that they're getting a quality development experience. If you have any sights on guys who are falling down the board, but they're from that program, that's actually worth something. And yeah, great point, Evan. They got a lot of looks on him, and they'll continue to be able to. And the last one here is a guy with a last name and then a first name, Fisher Scott, 208th overall, 7th round pick, Detroit's 2nd 7th round pick, 6'2" out of USHL. Who is Fisher Scott, that left-handed defenseman?
Plays for Dubuque, which is why I like the pick, because I get to say Dubuque. Just a fun word to say. Unimpressive numbers for, I think, his 3rd season in the USHL. Seems like he's fairly strong defensively. There's a foundation to work from. It's the 7th round.
The 7th round picks are almost guys you've rarely, if at all, ever heard of. And it's the team going, yeah, let's see. Or one scout likes him a lot, or whatever it might be. But by that point, like if you were trying to project anything with any degree of confidence with a 7th round pick, you're lying, or you know something that no one else in the world does, which just doesn't happen anymore. So that is the Detroit Red Wings draft class. Michael Brandsegg-Nygard, 1st round pick, 15th overall. 2nd round pick, Max Plante, 47th overall. 3rd round pick, Ondrej Becher, or is it Becher, 80th overall. 4th round pick, Landon Miller, 126th overall. 5th round pick, John Whipple, 144th overall. 6th round pick, Charlie Forslund, 176th overall. And the 2 7th round picks, 203rd and 208th respectively, are Austin Baker and Fisher Scott. Whether you want to do draft grade or overall impression, qualifying this by saying it is impossible to grade a draft right now, by and large, because you don't know how these guys are going to end up. But all that considered, first impressions, grade, however you want to qualify it, of the Detroit Red Wings 2024 NHL entry draft class.
I really like the philosophy of this draft, because that's basically all you're going on at this point, because every draft grade is, I understand it's going to get clicks, it's going to get reads, it's going to get listens, and it makes sense, but it's basically what players did this team take relative to my board, which is always an exercise in futility. I've been harping on the Red Wings for years about their draft philosophy being terrible, like really bad. This year they broke that mold. We make the jokes about Brandsegg-Nygard, but there's a high upside swing there. Max Plante, high upside. Ondrej Becher, high upside. A goalie, possible upside. Charlie Forslund, high upside. Hell, even Whipple as maybe turning into the Ben Sherratt type defenseman. Possible. I really, really like this draft for the Red Wings. I wish they would have taken this approach in the drafts where they had 10, 11 picks rather than just starting now. But I think between MBN, Plante, and Becher, they could have 3 dudes here. Like guys who can contribute. Statistically, one of them is probably going to pan out, and it's probably MBN. But if one of those other guys turn into what they could be, this draft is a grand slam. So I love the fact that they took a lot of upside swings here. If I had to assign a letter grade to it, I'd be somewhere between a B+ and an A-.
Yeah, I was going to land somewhere around a B+ as well, as I was thinking about it on my way over today. MBN, people can say it's a boring pick. I am certainly one of those types of people. I was very much banging the board for take the guy who will give you the ultimate boomer bust at that pick. But ultimately, this is a guy who will very easily fit into the middle 6. High chance he could be a top 6 productive forward at the NHL level. And then the rest of the draft is all high upside picks, which we've seen from the Red Wings not do in the last how many drafts. So I like the change in philosophy. If Becher doesn't pan out, does he become a strength piece down in Grand Rapids? Like, does he become a regular there? So there's organizational strength throughout this draft that I really liked from the Red Wings.
I think you guys qualified that all well. And I'll start with Michael Brandsegg-Nygard. And we talked a lot earlier this episode about, the pick and how people might feel and ultimate upside versus his upside, and, disagree with how optimistic any of us are, though you may. I think, for example, Evan, I'll use you as an example. You wanted to swing for the moon. You wanted the highest boomer bust potential because you're thinking of the boom. And I don't think that's a bad philosophy. I love thinking that way. And I think that's why, I had other guys who would have fit that philosophy in the same tier as MBN. But you also have to consider, look at Eiserman's job. We just got done talking about, and we'll continue to talk about until the end of time, they don't have Tampa's luck, Buffalo's luck, Colorado's luck, to Montreal's luck to constantly land these high-end players where they're picking. And so, yeah, you want to swing for the fences, but if the margins are perceived to be fine between MBN's upside and another player, or not too crazy, can you really afford to not get a top 6 forward with your 15th overall pick? It sounds crummy and like the team's in a bad position, but I don't think Detroit could. They had to consider minimizing risk of the player not landing, which is why I think you go with a guy who's a little bit more projectable. Do you sacrifice upside? I think they did a little bit, but it's easy to be an armchair GM or sit in front of a microphone or behind our Twitter accounts and saying, yeah, ultimate upside. And I'll probably keep doing it. But I don't know that the organization could afford the bust side of a true boomer bust pick. And that's something that if the Red Wings had some booms, like the Demidov type ultimate high end players already in the system, it almost makes it easier to do, but they almost can't afford it. So that's why, despite Brandsegg-Nygard not fitting my and our preference for ultimate upside, the pick is still really well liked. And yeah, I think you guys phrased it well. The upside in Plante, in Becher, in Forslund, philosophy-wise, I think the Red Wings did really well. They didn't have a wealth of picks like they've had in the past, but all in all, I think they added a reasonable amount to the system. Guaranteed to make it beyond Brandsegg-Nygard? Not necessarily, but if it hits, it hits. So yeah, I think the grade range that you gave, Brad, is perfectly fair. The Detroit Red Wings 2024 NHL entry draft class. Let us know your thoughts as well. It kind of went fast, the draft this time. It was going pretty quickly.
God bless the NHL.
Oh,
I haven't said that ever.
And it did seem cool at the Sphere, if not a bit cramped.
It did look really cool. They did a good job with it. Having the live pick feed on the outside of the Sphere as they were happening.
Very cool.
Was super cool. The graphics they were actually using for within the Sphere during the draft were awesome. The trade graphic where the big puck with trade comes and it looks like you're sitting inside the net looked super cool. Like, I think they actually did a great job with it. I was super pessimistic that they were going to waste the Sphere, but I don't think they did.
I don't know what they're going to do next year. There was a cryptic message kind of sent out. I think Wyshynski tweeted out, like he relayed it. But I thought they were going for sure off-site, like remote. Maybe it went so well that they want to go back. I'm not sure Jim Dillon's in the interested.
Bill Guerin's like, please no more.
Bill Guerin, they might have to go back to collect him next year.
He'll still be there.
Yeah, I was just saying, what do you mean Bill Guerin's saying, please no more? He's going to set up his war room in Vegas, maybe even at the Sphere.
He's taking up a residency at the Sphere, I think.
Yeah. All right. Other teams in your mind who stand out to you, and we'll go over this over time as well, but let's start with Montreal. They walked away with Demidov and Hage. And for both of them, they're players who, I think Hage, that was about his range, but Demidov could have gone second and went fifth. They have to be thrilled.
They had a really good draft. I really like what Anaheim did. It's easy to say it with teams that had multiple first-round picks because...
Did they do anything special? Not necessarily.
But you walk away with a top-end forward and a top 4 potential D. You're having a good round. San Jose lucked right into Sam Dickinson, even if they didn't pick the most ideal pick there. I think the big winners of day one, as far as teams with one pick go, Minnesota. You're sitting there at 13 going into the day. You think there's any chance in hell they were getting Zeev Buium? And all they had to do is give up a third-round pick to move up one spot to get him.
Yeah.
They're thrilled.
Can I say I'm not so thrilled if I'm a Chicago Blackhawks fan?
No,
Levshunov's a guy. Like he is a stud. I really like Levshunov. Wouldn't have been my pick, but they needed a defenseman, and he fits the bill. But they walked away with Levshunov, Boisvert, and Vanacker. I don't know. I feel like they could have done more.
I like Vanacker. That was okay for where they picked, but the way I look at that is you don't want to reach and go through a million hypotheticals, but if you're Chicago, are you happier if you're walking away with Levshunov and Boisvert or Demidov and Solberg?
That's what I'm thinking, right?
That's where I'm at, and it was right there for them.
I'm not sure they would have projected Solberg to go down that far.
But even then, Juracek, like I would have hedged one of them would have made it.
Yeah.
And then just the talent in Demidov almost makes it irrelevant. And hypothetically, Solberg and Juracek are off the board at 18 for you. That means a hell of a lot of good forwards fell. And are you really that upset if you have to settle for an MBN, a Hellenius, an Eiserman, a Hage, a Connelly? Like, they could have walked away with a lot more, especially with the context of they traded up to pick 18 weeks ago and then just used it to take Boisvert, who I would have almost guaranteed would have been there at 20.
A question we get every year, and I actually got it again before we hit record, is someone said, you do draft grades, but you never really see A pluses. What would Eiserman have to have done to get an A plus? And that is either through an act of the hockey gods or through trading up, you land a Demidov, a Buium, or a top end player that you were not likely to get coming into the day at 15th. So it's not really likely to happen very often, if ever.
Catton probably would have got an A plus from me.
Yeah, Catton. Yeah, he just went too fast, though.
Yeah, I think the best the Red Wings could have hoped for in a trade-up scenario was 10.
If you got to 12 and Catton and Buium were both still there, then I'm trying to find other GM's phone numbers myself and negotiating on behalf. Like that, with those two, just land either one of them.
I'll clean your house for a week. I don't have any money to offer, but I'll do what I can.
Yeah, what would an A look like, really? The Red Wings move up, get Zeev Buium. I think that probably pushes me into an A because I would have said there's no way he makes it outside the top 10. And then maybe the Red Wings keep their second round pick that they recently traded and move back up into the first round somehow. And someone they take a Liam Greentree, for example. Maybe that's what gets me to an A for the Red Wings.
All right. More on the draft in the coming episodes, I'm sure. Let's jump into the world of trades and free agency. It's over an hour later, and Trouba still hasn't been traded. The confidence level that it's going to happen today seems to be waning, but it still seems like that trade is in the works. I think you can qualify it as. Anything can happen and deals can fall apart. I've heard you're reading noise about, Tampa cleared all this cap space and that might affect how other teams think. But Trouba and Detroit, the thought was coming into the day that this trade was likely to happen. Trouba at, maybe $2.5 million retained, which would put him at approximately $5.5 million to Detroit. And the return is indeterminate. So in your mind, the fit for Trouba with whatever retained, and what would the return have to be for you to, what would you think of the deal, for example? Because it's not a clear-cut picture.
No, there's a lot of moving parts. So let's get the obvious out of the way. Trouba was playing with a bad ankle injury through the playoffs. So some of those meme-worthy bad moments probably were overblown because he was playing on almost 1 foot. That's the excuse I'll give him. Even if he ends up on the Red Wings, it's not going to excuse the fact I think he's a dirty player. I don't like the fact that he chicken wings everybody. However, he does have the exact element the Red Wings are sorely lacking. He is a player that would put fear into the opponent. He plays a very aggressive physical style. I think it was Blastrel had a great tweet. If for no other reason, Jacob Trouba would be worth it because he would kill whatever player went through with their annual assassination attempt on Dylan Larkin.
Yeah, I was like, that's a hilarious tweet, but also, yes, it's real. How often is Larkin injured and through it's no fault of his own?
Yeah. And Trouba probably would be the first guy to step up. He plays on the right side. He plays usually big defensive role, which maybe eases it up on Mo Seider a bit. I don't think he's going to do it nearly as well as Mo Seider. So what would the ultimate result of that be? I don't know if that's a net positive, but he's done it. And obviously the Red Wings have a glaring weakness on the right side of the D, so he fills that. For me, it comes down to what's the deal and what's the retention. The report was 2.5 retained. So you're getting Jacob Trouba for 5.5. Do I think he's a slightly better version of Ben Sherratt? Yeah, I think that's fair. So you pay $1 million more than Ben Sherratt. Yeah, that sounds about right. I do think Sherratt's overpaid, so I would still think Trouba is also slightly overpaid, but that's palatable. I don't think 5.5 for Trouba is unreasonable. The big thing for me is it's only 2 years. And I think that's a perfect bridge to the next wave of whatever this Red Wings D is going to look like. That could be your stopgap to Axel Sandin Pellikka right there. Hypothetically. Would I give up any premium assets in a trade for that? No. I'm kind of hoping this is just a cap dump and we don't give anything up at all.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what the accurate value of Jacob Trouba is right now. If they want a mid-round pick just to be like, we're paying $2.5 million. You got to give us something for that. Sure. Fair. I would totally understand that from the Rangers standpoint. I have concerns. I have more concerns than I have optimistic outlook right now, but once we see it all together,
If it happens,
I get it. And I think the Red Wings defense would be better with him than without him as it stands right now. We're not going to relitigate the Wallman thing. He's an upgrade on at least 3 defensemen on this blue line right now. I know that's not saying much. I can see you all running to your phones right now. I know, but it's still a point that is worth mentioning.
it is just going to be a lot of money, and you look at it and you're like,
why now is really my question.
Well, this team, like it or not, they're not interested in moving backwards. I think if they can, what they want to do is they want to move forward into the playoffs. I think what's most likely, based on everything that's happened, unless free agency goes nuts, and we'll talk about Stamkos in a second, they're probably going to stay in like the 91 to 95 point range, and then it's a toss up what the wild card picture looks like. And so Trouba is a stopgap, like Brad said. They lack the snarl, and who's playing on the right side behind Seider? They seriously lack guys who can defend. I think Trouba could maybe take those second, like 4 or 5 defenseman minutes. I think there's an outcome where Trouba is just as unviable on the second pair on the right side as Petrie was, for example. Petrie's slot is very firmly the third pair, and that's where he did a lot better. So it's not a certainty. And so I think what you said, Brad, about I have more concerns than I have optimism, but that doesn't mean you can't see the fit. The return, if the deal does end up going through, will dictate a lot of it. I don't know. I think anyone who argues there's literally no point of spending this kind of money on these guys and save that cap space for other things that have more long-term impacts, I think those people are objectively right. But it's almost a moot point, unfair though it is to say, because the organization is just not going to think that way right now.
It also is worth pointing out what the defense market in free agency is going to look like. Toronto just traded for the rights to Chris Tanev, and the rumor is they're going to give him a 5 to 8 year contract. He's turning 35 this year. I would much rather, I understand Chris Tanev's a hell of a lot better, but I would much rather only 2 years of Jacob Trouba versus having to give a 35-year-old that kind of term. And if you don't think Matt Roy's getting big money and other defensemen of that ilk are getting big money, I don't know what to tell you. Like
I shoot right and I play defense. I should have called up Toronto.
Yeah, last episode I spent a good amount of time talking about I would rather Eiserman give out 2 to 3 year contracts right now for weaker players than give out 5 to 6 year contracts for okay players, because the window's what I'm focused on. And
how much you like Elias Lindholm?
Ryan, I'm aware I'm going to be hurt on Monday. Okay? I am aware. I like getting these opinions out ahead of time so that when I'm whining and bitching about it in the moment, people can't say it's reactionary.
Not Brad. Not Bradley.
We can get Troy Stetcher back.
Either way.
Bring back the vibes.
I know where I stand on what I want the Red Wings to do, and I know I'm going to be upset about whatever they do on Monday, and I know I'm going to find glimmers of optimism in it while still being upset. We've been through this before.
Yeah.
Multiple times, but yeah, 2 years of Jacob Trouba, I think, is better than a lot of the alternatives out there because of the snarl and because of the it's only 2 years.
While you guys were talking, I looked up UFAs who are right-handed defensemen. Guess what the top amount of points is for the UFAs?
32.
I hate Brad so much.
Did he get it right on?
No, 33.
Oh my God.
That's close enough.
Yeah.
If we're talking in age, that's like a massive gap. But,
Yeah.
So, and that's Brandon Montour, by the way.
Who could be going to market.
Could be. So there's not a lot of high point producing defensemen there. So you have to explore the trade opportunities as well. And I think one people aren't talking about as well is, Jacob Trouba played at the University of Michigan. You know how Detroit is with those sorts of things.
He's from Rochester, Michigan.
And he's got a lot of leadership qualities, whether you think they're good or bad. That's
according
up to
to
you.
Mark Messier.
According to Mark Messier, he's an award winner. So you have to explore those opportunities, and you wouldn't be doing your job as Steve Yzerman if he didn't.
Steven Stamkos. I can't believe we're doing this again, however many years later. It feels like the Winged Wheel podcast has come full circle, but Steven Stamkos is reportedly not coming to terms so far with the Tampa Bay Lightning, and as it looks right now, he's going to market. Even though Tampa Bay cleared a ton of cap today, and we'll talk about that in a second, I expect Steve Yzerman to go aggressively after him. Maybe Kane affects things.
Why not both?
He signed Steven Stamkos as a UFA once before. Why not do it again?
Fool me once.
Because he's going back to Tampa. We're doing this again. We live in a simulation.
We use this phrase too much on the podcast, but I've been hurt before.
Steven Stamkos, outside of the fact that we all know we're just going to have the rug pulled out from under us, let's not talk about him in the context of Kane coming back or not coming back. We'll have a Kane update in a second here. But bringing in the player, 34 years old, 40 goal scorer recently, like he's still doing it, has lost a step. And I don't say this, like I don't want to knock it down and say it's easy to score 40 goals, but on Tampa Bay with the talent he had, a lot of power play production, people joke power play merchant, whatever, but 5-on-5 production isn't where he thrives at this stage in his career. That said, still a bit younger, feels like he can play a lot longer, 5 more years, whatever it might be. I don't hate a 3-year deal for Stamkos. We'll see what the cap hit is that he's looking for, because I don't know what Tampa's offering that's making him insulted enough to leave his team forever in a no income tax state. But especially if Kane goes, like Stamkos is a way to prop up the offense, even if you're not talking cup window years.
What was the one projection for his contract? 3 by 6.1? I'm doing that all day. That feels low. Like he's getting more than that. I feel like he's probably getting 4 years in the $7 million range, which gives me pause. I don't know if I would do that. The fit for Detroit is obvious. They have enough 200-foot forwards that they can shelter the fact that he's not going to be super effective at 5-on-5. But again, 40 goals. He's still lethal on the power play. Who's going to get him that puck? Great question. I don't know.
Max Plante.
It might be. I'm okay with it. Again, I'd rather give someone old like Stamkos or Kane a 3-year deal than give someone like Elias Lindholm or Jake Gensel an 8-year contract. 7-year, because that's all Detroit could do, but point still stands.
The least amount of goals Stamkos has scored in a full season is 23, which would put him 4th on the Red Wings this year in goals.
It wouldn't hurt. I also want to speak to, like, we have a lot of conversations about, think of the cup window and sign guys for that window and don't overcommit. I will say a big part of me doesn't disagree with the organization's want to not step backwards. Let's say the quiet part out loud. A lot of that is business driven. Ownership wants it. It's not a secret. You want butts and seats. If you're listening to a hockey podcast, a Detroit Red Wings podcast twice a week, you're keeping up on social media about it, you're a heavily invested fan and you're going to follow the team likely no matter what. The casual fans or fans who, follow a bunch of sports, like those are the people that they're trying to bring in, and that's what makes arenas full. So they don't want to now go backwards after the excitement of Raymond's emergence and Seider's emergence and Kane and what he did for Hockeytown last season. There's no interest in that business-wise. Excitement-wise, as a fan, I'm not even talking about like, oh, we want good content. As a fan, I want more of last season. I understand, like, really, what are you looking at in all likelihood as the best-case scenario, a playoff round win or two? That sounds amazing to me. Anything can happen, of course. You think St. Louis Blues, LA Kings, blah, blah, blah. But we've watched the Red Wings suck for so long. And we also know process of building a team-wise, winning begets winning, talent begets talent. There's a transfer of information, skills, that kind of thing. We saw that with Kane and probably Raymond and others this year, and how Kane's effect, permeated through the team. I think Stamkos, like if you can do that back-to-back years, I think there's value to that, and I don't hate that the team doesn't want to move backwards, because I think it sucks. I think it sucks for the fans. I think it sucks business-wise, although I don't really care. But I also think it makes the team better to at least slowly get better over time.
There's a way you can do that. 2 to 4 year contracts.
Yeah. And
you can have both.
Yep.
It's not easy, and you might not get a choice. we're talking about Stamkos. He might say, piss off, Nashville looks way better, and I'm going to go there. That's the risk in free agency. Yeah, that's why I'm on board with Kane, Marchessault, Stamkos, even Trouba. 2, 3, 4 year stop gaps from hopefully a majority legitimately good players. That gives you time for the young core to establish himself, get acclimated. Hell, these guys can be mentors for those guys. You want an elite shooter like Brandsegg-Nygard to learn from an elite shooter? Oh boy, let me tell you about Steven Stamkos' shot. Like, there is so much value in that. My whole concern, and I've beat this to death, is I don't want the Red Wings to go overpay mediocre players, even good players, for 7 years, because then you're getting the worst years of those contracts at the most important time for the Red Wings. You want to be competitive? They should be competitive. There's value in that. I don't want to see the Red Wings pick 5th overall again, because that means, holy hell, did something go really wrong. Go sign a few good free agents to 3-ish year deals. Leave enough of a gap on the roster so that Edvinsson, Johansson, Mazur, Kasper, Danielson, pick whoever the hell you want, gets their ice time, and they're competitive, and the Red Wings are winning games, and hopefully the goaltending holds up. Yeah, there's a way to do this properly.
Let's move on to Patrick Kane, because we've talked about him a little bit here. Patrick Kane, the story hasn't changed. There's still a chance he comes back to the Red Wings, and I don't think it's like, as a last resort. He likes the Red Wings, like the fit there. He's at an impasse in terms of what he wants. He really wants the 3-year deal. And right now, that offer is not coming from the Red Wings. What I'm hearing, based on what our understanding is, it's that Eiserman is really keen on 1 year. I don't know if he's gone to 2 years. I don't know if Kane has gone to 2 years. Whether that's where they meet eventually, that's hard to determine right now. I don't get the sense right now that there's a big market for Kane at 3 years in unrestricted free agency. But maybe once July 1 hits, that could change. Maybe, he signs in Detroit before that. There's no certainty in that space, but the door hasn't closed on the Red Wings, and I don't even think it's shutting. I don't think anything has moved in terms of someone coming in with a competitive enough offer to make Kane forget about the Red Wings. I do think he likes the idea of going back to the Rangers, and I do think he likes the idea of Buffalo, but Detroit is firmly in that mix as well. So, maybe a team swoops in and offers the term that he wants or more, and he goes to a market that he wasn't necessarily considering, but the security and the money is too much to ignore. But that's where the Red Wings are at on Kane. I get it. Like, he performed well this year, but maybe you still have concerns about when the drop-off is happening. I see Kane, and for the same reasons you said about Stamkos, I'm fine with a couple of years or a few years, personally.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be hilarious if the Red Wings trade for Trouba and give the New York Rangers the cap space required to sign Patrick Kane?
I haven't really heard that the Rangers are keen on the term either, though. I think they're saving the cap space for different things. You mentioned on the stream, Shesterkin.
Yeah, they're going to need the cap space for a lot of things, but I don't care if it's Kane. I don't care if it's Stamkos. I don't care if it's Marchessault. Get one of them, please. The offense has to come from somewhere on this team. And again, I have my preferences in terms of who to sign. And I'd rather risk giving someone like Kane an extra year versus giving Elias Lindholm 4 extra years or whoever. So Elias Lindholm's catching way too many strays from.
He's a good player.
Yeah, he's a good player. He's catching way too many strays for me on here, but he's just the most egregious example that comes to my mind immediately. Oh man, if you don't want to take a step backwards and you don't want to sewer your future, I'm sorry, you're going to have to step up and give an extra year term to one of these guys. You're just going to have to do it.
Okay, for the sake of time here, we're going to move on. Just quickly cover some of the bigger moves that happened. Utah.
How to build a decor in 24 hours or less.
What are you talking about? It was 15 minutes.
Tampa Bay dumping cap, which we all thought was for Stamkos at first, but then came out that they might be going hard at Gensel and trying to swoop him out from Carolina, which interesting. But Utah acquires Mikhail Sergachev in exchange for J.J. Moser, Connor Geekie, a 2024 7th-round pick from this year, and a 2025 second-round pick. So that's one defenseman to Utah. I wish I knew Sergachev was available. Whether you think he's overpaid or not, he'd be an addition. And then they also added John Marino and a 5th from New Jersey in exchange for a 2nd-round pick and a 2025 2nd-round pick that belonged to Edmonton. So the first one belonged to Washington originally and then Edmonton. So they added Marino and Sergachev like back-to-back right then and there, wheeling and dealing.
I don't ever want to hear, oh, it's hard from an NHL GM again. Tampa proving, hey, cap troubles, we can fix that in 15 minutes because we'll get to the Tanner Jeannot as well because they unloaded him today. And Utah, it's hard to build a defense. Today alone, they acquire Sergachev, they acquire John Marino, they re-sign Juuso Valimaki. All of a sudden, their defense isn't terrible. Like, it's tidy piece of business.
Yep, the Kevin Hayes contract was dumped with a 2nd-round pick.
Somehow Pittsburgh keeps getting older. It's truly an accomplishment.
Are we sure it's Kyle Dubas there?
I truly have no idea what they're doing over there at this point.
Tampa Bay cut their losses on Tanner Jeannot, again, really trying to cut cap. You can laugh at them for how much they overpaid for him, like a 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th Cal foot, was it? Something like that. And they didn't get all of that back, to say the very least, but I have respect for a team that knows when to cut their losses. So LA got Tanner Jeannot, Tampa Bay dumped the contract, and they got a 4th-round pick and a 2nd-round pick back. So,
hey, no one to avoid the sunken cost fallacy.
Right. Enough moves happened where it made day 2 especially very interesting. There's other trades as well, but for now, we're going to wrap this up and head into overtime. Again, Trouba may have ruined everything by the time you hear this, and that deal has come through. And
I'll check.
I've been checking nonstop.
Re-record things, and so depending on how this podcast sounds to you, we'll see. We're going to jump into overtime. Overtime is brought to you by our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. If you want to join the Dub Club and get access to great benefits like day 2 draft coverage, rounds 2 through 7, live hangout with the hosts, the Patreon exclusive Discord, the bonus episodes, which record right after these main ones, the giveaways, we automatically enter all of our patrons into all of our giveaways. And for example, we give away 2 tickets to every Detroit Red Wings home game. All of that and lots more. And for those of you who joined from the live stream, we can't thank you enough. This is why we can do those live streams and hopefully one day get better chairs for the studio and lots more. So again, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. Questions from our patrons. Let's start with this one from Kozlov's Punch to Foot's Head. Great name. Says, if 2nd-round selections have such a low chance of seeing 200-plus NHL games, why not trade them every year at the deadline to get a piece of contending players, to shed a bad contract, or to move back into the first, risk first reward?
When you're in your contention window, you should.
A lot of people do. NHL teams also, they don't, like, if you're trading into the first, that's a draft floor thing. And NHL teams don't trade a ton, relatively speaking, I'll say.
And when you're not good, you need to make a lot of these picks because you need a million darts, because you need to build the core of your future somehow. Like, every good team's had some mid to late round picks pan out that ended up just being found money.
That other guy says no one congratulated the Panthers for winning during the speeches. Was that odd? So there's 2 theories. One, everyone's pissed off at the Panthers because they were so annoying to play against. And that is the theory I subscribe to because it's funnier. Second, I think the NHL actually told people, minimize the speeches. Everyone is sorry for the passing of this person. Everyone congratulates Florida. Everyone thanks Vegas for hosting, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, there was none of that. It was actually great.
And there's 2 theories as to why that happened. One, the NHL recognized it's not a good product to keep doing that and waste all that time. People don't care. But 2, the theory is, well, to rent the Sphere, you're renting it from James Dolan, and he wasn't giving you a discount. So you really had to make sure you made time on rent.
It would be the most James Dolan thing ever to charge by the hour.
I believe it.
We said, the joke on the stream was, yeah, he gave the NHL a 30% discount, but he gave him 50% of the allotted time. Listening to Ryan Hanna in the shower says, is it just me or is it insane that Zetterberg didn't get drafted? I get that he's 5'8" and all that, but still.
Isn't he like 40? Am I missing something?
But actually, for the people who don't know the Zetterberg in the draft,
he's 5'7". I do not need to explain it beyond that. It doesn't matter how skilled you are. When you're 5'7", you are going to scare the ever living hell out of every team in the draft.
It's not a popular thing for small players to be taken, and that's, I don't want to say it's changing, but the pendulum's kind of swinging back the other ways. Sean Shapiro tweeted, there were only 3 players under 5'10" drafted. There were 5 players 6'7" drafted, to give you an idea.
That's all you need to know.
I know we talked about it, but from Samuel Soderholm says, what is your take on why Eiserman fell during the draft? It seems like most predictions had him going before 15th. Also, thanks for all the content as always.
Oliver Wahlstrom and Kiefer Bellows.
Say again. Explain to people.
Elite goal scoring with so little of a B game that it can't translate to the NHL because you can't keep up at the NHL. For the record, I don't think that's going to be an issue with Eiserman, but that is what scares teams off.
This one here is, I think, an interesting one. It's going to make you feel old. Brad Udalali says, some fun trivia. When was the last time Detroit hosted the NHL Draft?
1981.
When Brad was a young man back in 1987. Bonus question, when was the last time Detroit hosted the All-Star Game?
1980.
When Brad finished high school in 1980.
I remember that. That was Gordy. That was Gordy's big moment.
Yeah. Yeah. We're going to transition into our Patreon exclusive overtime. Folks, thank you so much for tuning into our draft coverage. This might not be the last time you guys hear from us before the month of June ends. We'll see how this goes, but this has been a wild ride, but genuinely we have enjoyed every second of it, though we may seem a bit dreary for lack of sleep. Can't thank you all enough for tuning into the live stream, for joining the Patreon, for your donations. It really does mean the world to us. We are thrilled to do this year in and year out, and the content's not over. Tuesday night, planned, is the free agency episode. Beyond that, we have a lot of great content planned. So thank you all so very much. I'd like to thank Labatt Blue Light for sponsoring this episode of the Wind Wheel Podcast. To all of our patrons, again, thank you. We could not do the show without you. If you're a new listener, welcome to the show. We are usually, I will say that the episodes aren't this long and we are usually a little bit more alive, but hey, this is par for the course this year, but we really appreciate you tuning in. Hope you enjoyed the show. And if you're a listener of old, best time of year for a Red Wings fan. We yearn for the day where this doesn't matter as much.
Yes, we do.
But for now, best time of the year. And to all of our name level supporters on Patreon, we can't thank you enough. Arjun Shankar, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Aikfer, Samuel Soderholm, Icon, Alexander Hansen, brand new name level supporter, welcome. Victor Zetterberg, Ghost of OSBP, Glenn Brabham, Croner's Left Knee, Ashley Van Conant, Sea Lion, Keenan O'Donohue, Brad is Wrong and Plays Like Sprong, Matthew M. Rice, Admiral Matt S. at the Cheesebag Navy, Carl Brutanen-Analuski, Carl Provy, Citizen High Five, Clip Clop Nene, Connor Scovey, Craig Kibble, Denny's Gamer Girl, Jarek Enstam, Seider, Dickens, formerly Marlon Winchester, DJ Denton, Eric Hill, brand new name level supporter. Welcome, Eric, to the Dub Club. Everyone looking at their phone right now is a lovely and kind person. God Creatives, Give Blood, Fight Probert, Goose Looney's Drinking Club, Hockeytown Love, Hockeytown Matt, Hassam Al-Qassem, Jake Olam, Jacob Turner, Jeff Pridemore, Joel Miranda, Jonathan Miller, Kalen Wood, Marcus, Marty, Matt Keeler, Matt McKay, Michael Edlund, R.A., Raul Pudd, Riley Enright, brand new name level supporter. Welcome, Riley, to the Dub Club. Pleasure to hang out with you on the live stream. Ryan Britt, brand new name level supporter. S. Klein, Scott Martin, Sid Duttler, Skeletor, Scree and Lube, Stoley70 Wingnut. That's what I appreciate about you. The Iser type, believe, or that's just a changed name, but maybe new name level supporter. Wallman's Elite Dancing D, Iser Plan Stan, General Andy Bohan of the Cheesebag Army, Sam Bankson, AA Ron, AB, Adam Rose, All Hail the Sphere, All Motor No Hands, Axel Sandy Pelika, Bellingham Acid Balls, Big Umami, well, that's a throwback, Chimkim Nutguts, Chuck Buff Chest, the Tarpless Goon, Commander Ben Barron of the Cheesebag Space Force, Connor Layton, Corey Prida, Darren Fick, Datsukes Dirty Deke, Datsukes Dangleberries, D-Bots, Eric Nance, Frank Stanley, Gene Sullivan, Griffey Boy, Ian, who's a brand new name level supporter, James Pridemore, Jeremiah Dobo, JM Rhapsody, Joey Jojo Shabadoo, John Evans Derogatory, John Ingalls, Josh Yelton, Kevin McCracken, Quaz, Les Grossman's Ungodly Firestorm, Linda Hull, Michigan Boy in Avs Country, Ophelia, Salt Lake Sugar Girly, Steven, the Hodag, the Hat 123, Throw the Road Puss, Trent Thorough, brand new name level supporter, Wings fan in St. Louis, Scott, and your second favorite patron. So many new supporters. Welcome. Thank you. We'll talk to you soon. The craziness is not over.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to check out wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find links to other ways to support the show, such as Patreon, official podcast apparel, and more. And don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at Winged Wheel Pod. And of course, the hosts at Brad Crisco, at Ryan Hanna WWP, and at Hockeytown Evan.